How my parents completely destroyed my 29th birthday dinner plans, embarrassed me in front of everyone, and shocked me with a completely unexpected twist that I never saw coming. I had been anticipating my 29th birthday for months, imagining a calm evening filled with laughter, good food, and the company of close friends. I spent days carefully planning every detail, from the decorations to the menu, making sure everything would be perfect. But the moment my parents arrived, I knew things were about to go horribly wrong. They walked in with their usual overbearing energy, immediately criticizing the dishes I had spent hours preparing and pointing out every tiny imperfection in the decorations. My friends, who were supposed to be enjoying a warm, happy celebration, were suddenly caught in the middle of a storm of harsh comments and embarrassing anecdotes from my parents. Just when I thought the night couldn't get worse, they revealed something completely unexpected, a shocking twist about my family that left me stunned and speechless. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief as the celebration I had envisioned for months unraveled before my eyes. The laughter I hoped to hear was replaced by awkward silence, and the joy I had been counting on vanished in an instant. Every moment became a battle between keeping my composure and confronting the truth my parents had thrown into the open, leaving me questioning everything I thought I knew about them, about myself, and about what it truly means to celebrate a milestone surrounded by the people who are supposed to love you most. The tension didn't ease even after the initial shock. I tried to distract myself by talking to friends, hoping that small conversations might bring back some normalcy, but every laugh I forced felt hollow, every smile strained. My parents, however, seemed determined to dominate every moment, recounting stories from my childhood that weren't flattering, highlighting mistakes I had long forgotten, and somehow managing to make even my friends feel awkward. At one point, my mother started criticizing the way I had arranged the seating, insisting that my choices were all wrong, and questioning why I didn't ask for their advice beforehand. I felt my blood boiling, yet I tried to stay calm. After all, this was my birthday, not theirs. But each attempt to redirect the conversation back to a pleasant topic was met with ridicule or outright dismissal. Then came the small, accidental moments that felt like daggers. One of my friends complimented the cake, only to be cut off by my father, who made a sarcastic remark about how the cake didn't even compare to the ones he and my mother used to make. I watched my friend's smile falter, sensing their discomfort, and felt a crushing combination of embarrassment and helplessness. My heart raced as I realized that no matter what I did, the evening had already slipped entirely out of my control. I had imagined a night of laughter, music, and warmth, but instead, I was trapped in a performance where I had to keep up appearances while enduring constant judgment. As the dinner went on, the shocking revelation my parents had dropped earlier continued to echo in my mind. They had brought up decisions about my life, financial choices, secrets about distant relatives, and long-hidden family conflicts that I had never known. Every sentence they spoke twisted the knife further, painting a picture of betrayal that I had no way to undo. I could feel my hands trembling, my stomach tightening, my chest aching. The noise of clinking plates and muted conversations felt distant, almost unreal, as I sat frozen at the table, trying to process the layers of anger, grief, and disbelief settling over me. I wondered how they could be so oblivious to the damage they were causing, how they could choose my birthday as the stage for their drama. Eventually, the night reached a point where there was no recovering dignity. The conversation spiraled into arguments that weren't meant to happen in front of guests, and my parents started speaking directly to me with a sharpness I hadn't heard in years, questioning my choices, my career, even my friendships. I could see the looks on my friends' faces. They were trying to stay polite, but the tension was unbearable. One friend quietly muttered that maybe we should cut the cake and move on, but before we could, my mother delivered another crushing blow, bringing up something from my past that I had been ashamed of and hadn't mentioned to anyone. The room fell silent. All eyes were on me, and in that moment I realized that this birthday would forever be etched in my memory, not as a celebration, but as a night of humiliation and painful truths. Despite all of this, I found a strange clarity amid the chaos. I realized that the people I had invited, my friends, were here because they cared about me, not because they wanted to witness my parents' tirades. Slowly, I began to speak up, my voice shaking at first, but gaining strength as I addressed the constant criticism. I reminded my parents, and myself, that this night was supposed to be mine, and that their actions were not just ruining a party, but straining relationships that mattered most. The tension didn't vanish instantly, but for the first time that night, I felt some control returning. I understood that I couldn't change them, but I could choose how I responded, how I let the night affect me, and how I moved forward after it. By the end of the evening, the dinner was technically over, but the impact lingered. The laughter I had envisioned had been replaced by uncomfortable silence, yet I had survived. I had faced the chaos, the revelations, and the embarrassment, and emerged with a new understanding of my boundaries, my relationships, and what it truly meant to be celebrated for who I am. Walking away from the table, I felt a mixture of exhaustion, sadness, and a strange sense of empowerment. This birthday had not been what I wanted, but it had shown me who I could rely on, who I could forgive, and who I might need to distance myself from. And though the night had been a disaster in every imaginable way, it had also been a turning point, a raw and painful reminder that family doesn't always make life easy, but it can teach you lessons that last far longer than any birthday cake or party ever could. As the night dragged on, the atmosphere in the room grew heavier with each passing minute. My friends tried their best to make light conversation, laughing nervously at jokes that barely landed, but the constant interruptions and biting remarks from my parents made it impossible for anyone to relax. Every time I tried to steer the conversation toward happier memories or small celebrations, my parents twisted the narrative, turning even the most innocent anecdotes into criticisms or reminders of past failures. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, a mix of embarrassment and frustration that made it hard to breathe. I wanted to vanish, to escape, to rewind time and erase the evening from existence, but I couldn't. The eyes of my friends, full of sympathy and discomfort, only intensified the weight of the moment, making me painfully aware of how exposed I felt. The food, which I had prepared with so much care, became another battlefield. My father poked at the dishes with exaggerated expressions of disgust, while my mother made loud comments about how children these days didn't appreciate proper cooking. I tried to ignore them, focusing instead on smiling at my friends and trying to salvage some semblance of joy, but it was impossible to mask my growing despair. One friend tried to compliment the dessert, only to be cut off mid-sentence by a remark from my mother about how it would have been better if someone else had baked it. I felt a mix of anger and humiliation so intense that my hands trembled. Then came another revelation, one that would push the night from unbearable to surreal. My parents began discussing matters from my personal life that I had never shared with anyone else, exposing private struggles, financial decisions, and family secrets that I wasn't prepared to confront. Each sentence felt like a punch to the stomach, leaving me frozen in disbelief. I could see the shock mirrored in my friends' eyes, their mouths opening in silent horror as they realized the full extent of what was happening. I had always believed my birthday was my sanctuary, a space where I could feel loved and celebrated, but that illusion was shattered. Every smile I had forced, every attempt to maintain normalcy, had been swallowed by a tidal wave of criticism and betrayal. As the night continued, I found myself oscillating between rage, grief, and numbness. At one point, I excused myself to the kitchen to catch my breath, leaning against the counter and trying to steady my trembling hands. The sounds of laughter, or what passed for laughter, drifted from the dining room, but they felt hollow, distant. I could hear my parents arguing about minor details, their voices sharp and commanding, each word slicing deeper into my patience and sense of self-worth. In that quiet moment, I realized that the night had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my family, about my boundaries, and about the kind of relationships I wanted to nurture going forward. Returning to the dining room, I made a conscious decision to reclaim control. I spoke up, addressing the room with a calm but firm voice, reminding my parents that this evening was supposed to celebrate me, not highlight my flaws. I acknowledged the shock of the secrets they had revealed, but also asserted that I deserved to be treated with respect in front of my friends. The confrontation wasn't easy. My voice shook, my emotions threatened to overwhelm me, but for the first time that night, I felt a flicker of empowerment. My parents were taken aback, unsure how to respond, and my friends, relieved to see me standing up for myself, began to relax slightly. The remainder of the evening was quiet, the tension lingering but no longer suffocating. The cake was eventually cut, though the moment was bittersweet, a small symbol of victory in an otherwise disastrous night. I realized that my birthday had become a mirror, reflecting not only the flaws and hidden truths of my family but also my own strength and resilience. I had endured humiliation, betrayal, and emotional chaos, yet I had survived. I had spoken my truth, defended my space, and emerged with a clearer understanding of what it meant to be respected and valued. As I looked around the room at my friends, offering smiles and gentle reassurances, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and empowerment. The night had been a catastrophe, yes, but it had also been a turning point. I understood that celebrations are not always about perfection, cake, or decorations. They are about who stands beside you when life feels messy and unpredictable. My 29th birthday had been everything I hadn't wanted: chaotic, humiliating, and painful. Yet, in its chaos, it had taught me lessons I would carry forever about boundaries, resilience, and the courage to confront the people who matter most, even when it's uncomfortable. Walking away from that dinner, I carried not just memories of disappointment and shock, but a newfound sense of clarity and strength, knowing that no matter how messy life, or family, becomes, I had the power to reclaim my own narrative and define my own celebrations. After the cake was finally cut, and the awkward small talk resumed, I thought maybe, just maybe, the worst of the night was over. But I quickly realized I was wrong. My parents, never ones to let a moment pass without asserting control, began picking apart the presents I had received, making offhand comments that made my friends squirm in their seats. A gift from one of my oldest friends, a heartfelt, carefully chosen item, was dismissed with a sarcastic remark about how it wasn't even practical, leaving me mortified. I could feel my face heating up as I desperately tried to shift the attention elsewhere, but every attempt to steer the night back to something joyful seemed futile. I wanted to tell them to leave, to storm out and end the humiliation, but something inside me resisted. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps it was disbelief, or perhaps it was the lingering hope that the evening could somehow still hold some meaning. As the hours dragged on, the tension only deepened. My parents began rehashing old family disputes, resurrecting grievances from my childhood as if this birthday dinner were the perfect stage for airing decades-old complaints. My friends exchanged worried glances, whispering quietly to each other, trying to offer support, but I could see the discomfort etched across their faces. Every sentence from my parents felt like a calculated move to dominate the room, to control not just the conversation but the narrative of my own life. I felt trapped, like a performer in a play I had never auditioned for, forced to endure the show without any script of my own. Then came the final revelation, the one that would cement this night as unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. My parents, in their usual blunt and careless way, brought up a financial matter, a secret they had been hiding from me for years, involving money, property, and decisions that directly impacted my future. They spoke with a shocking nonchalance, as if these revelations were casual dinner conversation rather than life-altering information. I felt the room spin around me, my mind struggling to process the enormity of what I was hearing. My friends froze, unsure how to react, some covering their mouths in disbelief, others exchanging whispered apologies for having invited me to this disaster of a dinner. I wanted to scream, to cry, to collapse, but instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity. For the first time that night, I realized I had a choice. I could let this night define me, let their cruelty and carelessness break me, or I could take control of my own story. I took a deep breath, steadying the trembling in my hands, and began speaking. My voice was shaky at first, but as I recounted my feelings, my experiences, and my expectations for the evening, I felt a shift. My parents looked startled, unaccustomed to hearing their child confront them so directly, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty in their eyes. My friends, sensing the change, began to relax, offering supportive nods and gentle smiles that gave me courage. I realized that this night, as chaotic and painful as it had been, was also an opportunity, a chance to assert myself, to reclaim my voice, and to establish boundaries I had long avoided. By the end of the evening, the storm had passed, though the aftermath lingered. The dinner table, once the site of criticism and tension, was now quiet, filled with an awkward but relieved energy. My parents, though still unrepentant in many ways, seemed to recognize the limits they had crossed, while I sat back, exhausted but empowered, understanding that I had survived one of the most challenging nights of my life. As I looked around at my friends, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. They hadn't judged me, hadn't laughed at my humiliation, and had quietly stood by me through every uncomfortable moment. Walking away from that night, I carried more than just memories of embarrassment and shock. I carried lessons about the complexity of family, the necessity of boundaries, and the resilience required to stand up for oneself even in the most painful circumstances. That birthday, which I had once imagined as a simple celebration of another year of life, had transformed into a profound reckoning. It showed me that life rarely unfolds as we plan, that people, even those closest to us, can disappoint, and that the strength to reclaim our narrative comes not from avoidance, but from facing the chaos head-on. I went to bed that night exhausted, emotionally drained, but also strangely enlightened, knowing that I had survived, that I had spoken my truth, and that even in the worst of circumstances, I could emerge stronger, wiser, and more certain of who I was and what I deserved. Even after the quiet settled over the dining room, I could feel the tension lingering like smoke, clinging to every corner of the room. My parents, though momentarily subdued, were still subtly imposing, tossing occasional side remarks about how I handled the situation, as if to remind everyone that even after my confrontation, they still held some sort of control. My friends, sensing the fragility of the moment, stayed unusually quiet, giving polite nods and offering small smiles that were meant to reassure me but also betrayed their discomfort. I couldn't blame them. Watching someone endure the emotional storm my parents had created was unsettling, even for the closest friends. I, however, felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion, as if a weight had lifted slightly but left a raw ache in its place. It was then that my parents, perhaps feeling the sting of my earlier confrontation, decided to escalate things once again. My father, leaning back in his chair with a self-satisfied smirk, began recounting stories from my childhood, stories I hadn't heard in years, some of which were embarrassing, some of which were painfully personal. My mother joined in, offering pointed commentary that twisted each memory into a subtle critique of who I had become. Every word felt like a deliberate attempt to assert dominance, to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. My friends' faces grew increasingly tense, and I could feel my own hands clenching under the table. I wanted to shout, to defend myself, to tell them they were crossing lines, but I also knew that reacting in anger would only give them further satisfaction. Instead, I focused inward, counting my breaths and trying to maintain composure. I reminded myself that this night, as painful as it had become, was an opportunity to observe and learn, to see clearly how my parents operated, to recognize the patterns of manipulation, and to understand my own limits. I realized that no matter what they said or did, I had the power to decide how I responded, how I allowed their words to affect me, and how I carried myself through the chaos. Each insult, each jab, became less about me personally and more about their inability to navigate relationships with kindness and respect. Then came the final revelation, a culmination of weeks of tension that had been simmering under the surface. My parents, in their usual blunt and careless way, began discussing legal matters and financial decisions they had made without my knowledge, decisions that directly affected my inheritance, my living situation, and even some of my personal investments. Their tone was disturbingly casual, as if these were trivial dinner conversation topics rather than life-altering disclosures. My mind reeled, spinning through scenarios, possibilities, and implications. The room seemed to shrink around me, and I could hear the faint gasps and whispers of my friends, trying to process the gravity of what was being revealed. I felt a surge of anger, disbelief, and betrayal, mixed with a strange, cold sense of clarity. This was reality, unfiltered and raw, and I needed to face it head-on. For the first time that evening, I fully spoke my mind. I addressed my parents directly, my voice steady despite the trembling in my chest, laying out exactly how their behavior had affected me, how their revelations had shocked and hurt me, and how I deserved respect and space on a night meant to celebrate my life. I could see the surprise in their eyes. They weren't used to being confronted so openly. My friends, sensing the shift in energy, began offering small, supportive comments, nodding and smiling, reinforcing my strength. It was a turning point. The power dynamic had shifted slightly, no longer entirely in my parents' favor. For the first time that night, I felt a flicker of control, a glimmer of dignity that had been absent from the evening up until that point. The dinner eventually wound down, the remnants of cake and plates of half-eaten food scattered across the table. My parents were quieter now, subdued but still defiant in their own way, and my friends quietly helped me clean up, offering words of encouragement and empathy. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, my body heavy from adrenaline and emotional turmoil, yet I also felt something I hadn't anticipated: empowerment. I had survived a night that had felt almost unbearable, confronted deep family secrets and long-held criticisms, and asserted my boundaries in a way I hadn't done before. Walking to my bedroom that night, I reflected on what had happened. This birthday, intended as a celebration, had turned into a crucible of emotions: humiliation, shock, anger, grief, and ultimately, resilience. I realized that life, much like this evening, rarely unfolds as planned. People, even those closest to us, can disappoint, manipulate, and hurt us, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes deliberately. But what mattered most was how I chose to respond, how I claimed my voice, defended my boundaries, and recognized who truly stood by me when the chaos unfolded. I understood that birthdays, celebrations, and milestones are not just about cake, presents, or party decorations. They are about relationships, respect, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths while still holding on to one's sense of self. As I lay down that night, exhausted but awake with thoughts racing through my mind, I knew one thing for certain: I had survived the storm. I had witnessed the darker sides of those I loved, I had faced humiliation and shock, and I had still found a way to rise above it, to reclaim my narrative, and to define my own path forward. My 29th birthday dinner had been a disaster, yes, but it had also been a profound lesson, a lesson in resilience, clarity, and the importance of standing firm even when the world, or your own family, seems determined to tear you down. And though I would never forget the chaos of that night, I also knew that it had changed me, making me stronger, wiser, and more certain of the life I wanted to lead, and the people I wanted by my side. As the night finally drew to a close, the remnants of chaos lingered like shadows in the corners of the room. My parents, quiet now, seemed to retreat into their own world, leaving me to process everything that had happened. The room, once full of tension and harsh words, was now filled with silence, a silence that felt heavy but also oddly liberating. I looked around at my friends, who had stood by me through every humiliating moment, and felt a surge of gratitude. They hadn't judged me, they hadn't laughed at my embarrassment, and their quiet support reminded me that family isn't only defined by blood. Walking to my bedroom, I finally allowed myself to feel everything I had been suppressing: the anger, the hurt, the shock, and yes, even the relief. I realized that this night, as painful as it had been, had taught me more about myself than any ordinary birthday ever could. I had discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed, a clarity about the relationships I wanted to nurture, and the boundaries I needed to enforce. I thought about my parents' actions, about the secrets they revealed, and about the relentless criticism. They had hurt me, yes, but they had also forced me to confront truths I had avoided for far too long. Sitting on my bed, I reflected on the lessons I would carry forward. Birthdays, I realized, aren't just about celebration, They are mirrors, showing us who stands with us, who undermines us, and who challenges us to grow. My 29th birthday had been a disaster in every conventional sense, but it had also been transformative. I had faced humiliation, betrayal, and emotional chaos, yet I had emerged with a stronger sense of self, a clearer understanding of my boundaries, and a renewed appreciation for those who truly care. I allowed myself a small, exhausted smile. The night had tested me in ways I never expected, but I had survived. I had faced the storm, spoken my truth, and reclaimed my voice. And in that quiet moment, alone in my room, I understood something profound. Life will never be perfect, people will never always behave as we hope, but our strength, our resilience, and our ability to stand firm in the face of chaos is what defines us. My birthday dinner had been ruined, yes, but it had also shown me who I truly was, and that realization, painful as it had been to arrive at, was a gift no one could take away. I closed my eyes, letting the exhaustion wash over me, but beneath it, a quiet sense of empowerment settled in. I knew that moving forward, I would celebrate not just the milestones of life, but the victories of survival, courage, and self-respect. And for the first time in hours I felt at peace, knowing that no matter what challenges, conflicts, or secrets the future held, I was ready to face them on my own terms.